Hey everybody, and welcome back. In today's DIY, we are going to show you how to make this fun and beautiful hexagon-shaped honeycomb accent wall. If you want to see how we did it, just stay tuned. Now, before we get started, we already have our template drawn out, and so I'm going to go back and show you how we did that. I knew that I wanted my hexagons to be about 8.5 inches tall. I just knew that's what size that I wanted. So in order to be able to get the direct dimensions on here, I took a regular old piece of copy paper that's an 8.5 by 11 and decided to keep as much of the width as I could so that I could get about that 8.5 inches. I started off on the top by measuring out what I felt like was going to give me the direct dimensions, which turns out to be 5 inches. Once I drew my line to the 5 inches, I then took my protractor and I set my protractor to a 60-degree angle. This is a 6-sided figure, and since this really does kind of base itself off of a circle, you want each of your sides to be at a 60-degree angle so that all of your angles will end up at 360. Now, when this was still a full sheet of paper, what I simply did was I placed my dot at the very edge of my 5-inch line. I set my protractor at that 60 degrees, and that gave me where to draw the next side. And of course, this was going to measure also at 5 inches. All of your edges should be the same size, 5 inches all the way around. And for each new line that you draw, you just want to set that at your 60 degrees. Now, when I got done and I had that all lined out and I cut out my form, it didn't look quite exact to me. So what I decided to do was to fold my shape right in half. And then I just trimmed off around any of the edges that might have been slightly different. This will make sure that both halves of your hexagon are exactly the same so that when you open it up, all of your sides are even. The final step that I did before attaching this to my wall was I took a plain sheet of cardstock. Not sure if you can hear that. Cardstock paper is definitely thicker than regular print paper, and it makes a better template on your wall because it is less bendable and movable. So I simply laid my template onto that cardstock, and then I traced it and cut it out, using this now as the template that I would then use on my wall. Now, when you begin to tape your hexagons or whatever shape that you're using onto your wall, you do want to make sure that you find the center point. You do not want to start on either of the edges because then it is going to throw one of your shapes off of balance. So just measure your complete wall. You want to find the center vertically as well as horizontally, and for me, that center point was right here. And I began working here and then just began putting my shapes on off of that center point so that when I get done and get the whole wall taped off, you will notice right here on the edge of this wall that there is a partial piece of the hexagon. And when I work my way all the way down to the end of this wall, we should end up with a similar pattern. You can see a closet hole here. We are just going to bring that pattern up around the closet and finish it off with this little corner. And when we do, we should have just a little piece of the hexagons left on this side. That is why you do want to start in the center of your wall. Now we are taking our template. In our case, we have used a hexagon shape, and I have double-sided or just wrapped around a piece of the painter's tape so that if you use regular tape and you pull it off the wall, you're going to pull your paint. So you do want to use a painter's tape. And what I am doing, you can tell, after I got that center point down there all lined up, we are just working off of that. We want to make sure that we line our template up with the line of the one that will be below it. But one thing that I have discovered is that sometimes these lines are not exact because you're just not working with a perfect setup. So you do want to take a mini level, if you have one of these, and you just want to set that right on top of your hexagon. And this will tell you when you're off or when you're straight. And even if it ends up that it doesn't line up perfectly with the line underneath it, it's okay because your paint will fix that. You just want to make sure that your lines on top of each hexagon is straight. Now, the easiest way that I have found to tape out your design is to hold your tape up and kind of get a rough measurement on just reaching right across the top of the pattern. You will see here where we have some gaps in our designs, and we will fill those in as we get to the next hexagon. So as you're starting off your first hexagon, you just want to align your tape with the measurement of that side. And we're just gonna cut that with a pair of scissors. Now, what I do to ensure that I don't peel my tape off, and another thing, let me mention this real quick, is make sure that whatever paint you are putting a design over has cured for at least 7 days. You do want to make sure that your paint is good and cured before starting any type of tape design. Now, to ensure that my tape does not pull that paint in any way, I just put it on my arm and just give it a good rub. And whenever I take that off, that is going to make this just a little less tacky, but still tacky enough that it is going to stay secure while I'm painting. So that is one good tip that you may want to try to avoid messing up the original paint. Now we're just going to go ahead and we're going to line this right up with the top of our pattern. And we're just going to continue this around all 6 sides. Now, just to show you how you are going to fill in these little gaps here that we leave in our tape, when you measure this side, you want to bring your tape down to where it is going to cover that little triangular section completely. Go ahead and measure just right there to the edge of this side, and this is still going to leave a little triangular space here, but you will fill that in when you begin working on this hexagon. So that is how we cover up these spaces as we progress up our wall. So as you can see, that completely filled in our little gap, and when we remove this to begin working on our next hexagon, it will be a complete shape just like the one below it. Now we're just going to continue on until we get our whole wall taped off, and we'll be back to show you how we place our paint. And as you can see, we finally have that wall completely taped off with our honeycomb pattern. We simply took that pattern right around that closet doorway as though the closet interrupts our pattern. And you can see on this corner as well as that corner that you just have pieces of the honeycomb pattern, and that is what you want. So be sure that you do begin taping off your patterns from the center point of your wall. Our wall is about 13.5 feet, and at the highest point it is right at about 9.5 feet, 9 feet, 9.5, somewhere in there. So that gives you an idea of what size this wall is. It tapers down to just 7 feet at that corner there. This did take about 1.5 rolls of the painter tape, and it did take us about 8 hours to get the whole thing taped off. So that will give you an idea based on the size that you are working on. Now it is time to begin applying our paint. Now once again, as we get ready to apply our paint, we are starting with our center hexagon, and we are just working, we don't have any rhyme or reason. We're just going to start putting colors where we like them to be. 2 shades of a teal and a shade of gray to tie that in with the rest of our room. You do want to use a smaller roller for this because of the size of the hexagon, and you just really want to go ahead and roll around where the taped edges are to try to avoid any seepage. Then you can just fill in the center. Now the object here when working with taped off patterns is that you do want to move quickly, because it is optimal to remove your tape while your paint is still wet to avoid any peeling. The problem is we're not quite sure yet if we will need 2 coats. So we're going to give this just a little bit of time to begin to dry and to see if we're going to need a second coat. If so, your second coat will re-wet the first coat, so you'll be okay to take the tape off after that. And if we don't, we're still going to be working fast enough that before it's completely cured, we'll be removing our tape. Here we have our completed wall. We have everything all painted off and cut in just random patterns, not really any rhyme or reason to the color pattern. And now we're going to fixing to take off the tape and show you how we're going to do that. As you can see, we have already begun taking off some of the tape, and you will notice there are a few spots where the paint did slip up under our tape, and that is okay because we're simply going to fix these areas with a white paint pen, and it's going to cover it up like it never even happened. So all you want to do is gently begin to lift your tape, and at this point your paint should still be somewhat wet, not completely set, although it will dry somewhat by the time you get finished with an area this big. Make sure you go slowly just to make sure that it is not peeling your paint as you go. You might want to have a razor knife handy and on standby just in case you start to see any peeling at all. That way you can cut it loose where it doesn't ruin your design. Also, if you stuck this to your arm and made it a little less tacky, it should leave your paint underneath perfectly intact. And now here is our beautiful accent wall made in the honeycomb design using the hexagons. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and if you decide to give this a try, be sure to tag me and let me take a look. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.